You see people all the time who, they're so nice. You can't even be in the same room with them. They're that nice. But they're resentful and passive aggressive. They take it out in all sorts of ways, partly because they're always unhappy. They're often moralistically judgmental because they're not saying what they have to say. They got to integrate that shadow. So that was part of it. And the shadow consists of, in part, all the things about you that you've deemed morally unacceptable and failed to develop. And so sometimes that's aggression, often. Sometimes it's sexuality, often. And so it'll manifest itself in impulsive, aggressive sexuality, say under conditions of alcohol intoxication when it leaks out.
Aggressive, meaning like rough sex? Like
yeah, forced. Yeah, definitely.
Forced. So you mean like rape?
Well, or it doesn't have to go all the way to rape. It can be like over-aggressive sexual compulsion in a dating situation.
So does that account for certain men that like violence in their sex, like they like abuse in their sex? Like,
yes.
Because there's a subset of men that like to hit women during sex.
Yeah.
And a lot of them turn out to be these like kind of male feminist types, which is really strange.
No, it's not.
But it's
exactly
really
what you'd predict.
strange on the outside.
Definitely.
When you find out.
It's strange to those men, too, because it's very unsettling for them to see, in the cloud of their niceness and their harmlessness, this deep, dark desire making itself manifest.
Do you remember that case of that Canadian broadcaster who was this guy who was like, really talks like this, very calm, and then a bunch of women came out that dated him, said he beat the shit out of them, and he would want to beat them up during sex, like really beat them up, like punch them in the face. And
yeah,
stuff.
well, it's an open question how much assertiveness there should be in sex, and that the answer is zero. No, I'm not saying in the least that that's acceptable. Let me be absolutely clear here.
Well, I was
that's
just
not
going to say
acceptable
that's
at
not
all.
assertiveness.
No, it's not. It's repressed. It's repressed. It's what's repressed. There's no clearer way of saying it. It's like, look, many men are terrified of women, many. And so that terror might manifest itself, even in a relationship, in the inability to ever let the partner know what they really want.
They're terrified for what reason? Because of rejection? Yeah.
Yeah. And then the feelings of inadequacy that produces, often which are necessary. They're necessary.
Right.
Right.
I was trying to explain this to a friend once where we had a friend of ours who had developed what seemed to be like a real hate for women. And he wasn't an attractive guy. And so we were having this conversation and I said, imagine if all of your interactions with women hurt your feelings and you're not a very thoughtful and introspective person. You would immediately associate women with negative feelings and you'd be angry about them. And that's what's happening to that guy. He got a bad roll of the dice in terms of his facial features and his genes. It just wasn't that good. And so he was not, girls were not interested in him. So he had developed this anger. And it was shocking.
Yeah. Welcome to the human race.
It's shocking to, well, that's incels, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's not even incels. It's like, okay, so I'll finish one thought because we were talking about transsexualism.
Yeah.
So the second stage of development in the Jungian sense is the integration of countersexual possibilities. So I just watched Joaquin Phoenix in Joker. And he's a very charismatic actor. And I was thinking, well, God, because he carried that whole movie on single-handedly. It's a dark, dark movie, and it has to do with resentment. This man who was forced to be nice by his mother, who turns out to be absolutely crazy and abused him like mad when he was a kid. And then he becomes this role model for the dissemination of complete catastrophe into the entire society. It's a story of Cain in part. But Phoenix really carries that, and part of the reason that he does that is because he creates a compelling character who's sympathetic. Like, you can be sympathetic to him because he really did have a hard life, like really hard. But Phoenix is an extraordinarily charismatic person, partly because he's so he's masculine in his features and carved, but he's so graceful. Every single thing he does in the entire movie is a dance. Like, he's conscious of every single movement he makes. Every turn of his head is conscious. It's dance-like, and you can't take your eyes off it. And a lot of stellar performers had that ability to integrate, male performers had that ability to integrate that feminine grace into their masculine character. You saw that with Bowie, David Bowie. You saw it with Mick Jagger. He said there are good examples. A lot of those 70s glam rockers were gender benders, long hair, a lot of flashy outfits, and they did show, and they weren't exactly androgynous. That's not the right way to think about it. Is they manifested a higher order integration of masculine and feminine, and that made them charismatic because
That's Prince. He's the best
Prince,
example.
sure. And so that's high order integration. And I would say that part of the compulsion between adult onset transsexuality of the autogynephilic type is a consequence of the sexual instinct manifesting itself as a guide to the integration of personality across the sex divide.
I'm sure you're familiar with Douglas Murray's work.
Yes, and Murray, who's very funny, who I like very much, and who's one of the most courageous people I've ever met.
Yeah, he's brilliant. And he had an amazing point about civilizations collapsing, and that when they start collapsing, they become obsessed with gender. And he was saying that you could trace it back to the ancient Romans, the Greeks.
Yeah, Camille Paglia has made much of that.
Yeah.
I think probably it's not so much an obsession with gender, it's a disintegration of categories as a precursor. Like, so it's a marker for if categories dissolve, especially fundamental ones, the culture is dissolving because the culture is a structure of category. That's what it is.
Right.
So, and in fact, culture is a structure of category that we all share.